Very much for this opportunity again. It really has been a tremendous few days, and it speaks just much more than words can, that this kind of activity is produced with people all around the world. Fabian gave you my, sort of my jobs right now. I'm from the United States, so inevitably I see what is happening in technology in many ways that are shaped by what is happening in the United States, but I didn't always spend all my time there. There was a period in my life when I spent a lot of time closer to here. My doctoral degree is in Arabic literature, modern Arabic literature, Adab al-Iltizam, actually, specifically. And I went following that to work for some years, over a decade, in and around national security. So my entire professional life has been spent thinking about how people try to dream about and shape the international world, whether it's through their stories, their art, their culture, and their political activity, or through the more traditional instruments of national power, like diplomacy and the military. I have chosen to make my presentation very narrowly addressed to the issue of automation, although it's clearly only one of many factors that will affect the future of employment. But I'm doing this because it's still an emerging and unfolding technology, and its effects on employment are still being debated. There is a lot of study coming out right now, and so it's that I want to share with you. Automation, no matter what you think, is clearly an issue that will impact the future of employment everywhere. Because, obviously, we live in a globalized world with interconnected supply chains and economic systems, it's really not enough to look only at what automation is doing or what is happening in our own country, our own sphere. It's rather important to understand how it may change the nature and balance of production everywhere, because what happens somewhere else will have an effect here and potentially vice versa. So as North African countries actually seek greater interdependence and greater reliance on that global supply chain, at least as I understand it, I am persuaded that this is a very critical issue here. I also want to focus on it because there is a lot, I don't know what you are seeing, of information and forecasts coming out of the countries where this issue is getting very significant attention, like the United States, and I want to clarify what the current state of analysis is telling us. So let's be clear what we're talking about first, and about why automation is such a big issue now. It isn't because automation is anything very new. The first completely automated industrial process was actually the automated flour mill, and that was created in 1785, which reminds us that things have been made automatic, or machines have been created that don't require thinking and can be run without human assistance for some hundreds of years, and that there are many periods of automation preceding our own: mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, electrical, electronic. There's no question, however, that computer-aided automation has advanced it into new realms, and that the advance of artificial intelligence and robotics are why it is now seen not only as an aid to human labor, but a replacement, potentially, of human effort, and that is where the crux of our anxieties lie. The kind of automation that we have had until today in industrial environments has had a very consistent context. One instrument drills the same hole over and over into the same metallic piece, tirelessly and without end. What artificial intelligence, as it advances, and robotics have changed is this. By developing computers or machines that can respond to different kinds of situations and to particular contexts and to changing contexts, whole new realms of activity for those machines, for those automations, open up. And those are where we work, we humans. When artificial intelligence and automation is paired with the elements of robotics, capacity to move, and many sensors, you have in your hands the ability to automate many human activities, from driving to looking for buried explosives, to performing customer service at a fairly high level for different customers with different queries. So all these processes exist, but why should they matter to policymakers, which was kind of the context in which we were talking about, the context, of course, of IRIS's policy. If you look at the news headlines about automation these days, at least from where I am living, you would be pretty alarmed. They are things like special report, automation puts jobs in peril. Robots do destroy jobs and lower wages, says a new study. Automation could slash jobs in developing countries, and those are all taken from the last few weeks. I just pulled them right off the internet and the top of Google. So the language here is pretty extraordinary. The news makes it sound as if we humans are on the losing side of a war on our work. Automation has agency, it's almost violent, it endangers us, it slashes, it destroys. The verbiage is just extraordinary. And it appears to be inevitable because it, in the headlines, is doing things to us. So I think this is very problematic language in several aspects. First of all, if we happen to live in a context, and I would say that many of us do right now, where we don't directly see the effects of automation in our lives, in our professional lives, or in our workplaces in new ways, then this seems awfully hyperbolic and possibly completely irrelevant. Why should we pay attention? But if we do choose to pay attention, then this language is very sort of hopeless. It makes us feel powerless, and I think that that is very far from the situation that we are actually in. Most of the headlines, so here's the situation, and this is that use the language of this sort are pointing to studies that have big numbers at the top of them. This is how many jobs will be lost. This is what large percentage of jobs will be lost. But what they are always talking about at that surface, because I've now dug into these studies, is only about the technological capability that exists right now. So when a study says 47% of the jobs or 2/3 of the jobs in the developing world could be lost, they're talking about the technological capability right now of doing a certain kind and amount of work. What are they not talking about? They're not talking about what needs to be legislated, whether it will, what needs to be regulated, what needs to be made affordable, what will be acceptable to business owners or to workplace owners before it lands on a factory floor or anything else. And what that means for policymakers and for national planners and for a bunch of other stakeholders is that we all have a critical role in laying out how the issue of automation is going to be approached. I'm in favor of double-sided pages for the trees, but it is a challenge. And that good planning and the need to sort of think in a planning mode is really worthy. So the other aspect of automation, as I referred to briefly, is that it is absolutely critical that it be understood that it not only matters wherever we are, whether that is Morocco or the region or somewhere else. It is important to watch what is unfolding on other countries, what their actions, policies, and forms of adaptation are. Because what happens elsewhere is going to ripple through the global supply chain. And for a country that positions itself, for example, as a portal for the import and export of goods, or as the provider of back office professional services, it's important to know whether other places are automating some of the work that goes into that. So I want to take a look at some of, these are just points, at some of the studies that have come out. And actually I made a little sort of sheet which I think will be posted on the ARIAS website in the next couple of weeks, so you can look them all up yourselves. In the last year, a whole bunch of big studies have come out by major consulting and accounting firms, McKinsey, PricewaterhouseCoopers. You might be interested in the McKinsey study. It's called Harnessing Automation for a Future That Works. And it is global, and it has a lot of information unlike most studies which are coming out of the United States or Europe, that is relevant and from the point of view of Morocco and the region. In the last month of the Obama administration, the Obama White House put out a major study of automation and artificial intelligence in the United States. Last November, a think tank in Canada, in Ottawa, put out a significant study of how Canadians will refigure their social architecture to deal with what they see as unemployment and underemployment caused by automation. Here, the OECD completed a study of the risks of automation unemployment in OECD countries, and the International Labor Organization sponsored a study on the future of jobs in the ASEAN countries. So, I mean, this is just to say this stuff is coming out. Citibank and Oxford released a study at the beginning of 2016. The World Bank has data, and these are just a few of the things that are in English. There is, to be sure, quite a lot more. And what is interesting is that I can't actually share with you any consistent even kind of amalgamation of the specific relationship to jobs that are perceived to be at risk. The numbers are all over the place, and they're calculated in very different ways. There are numbers, percentages, countries, sectors, and then, I would insert into this that actually the numbers right now are important to look at, but they're actually not the only factor because they only talk about technological capability. The numbers have nothing to say, nothing right now, about how automation will be negotiated in different countries in relation to value creation. So I wanted to I did manage to pull out some wisdom, I think, from about 10 or 12 studies, and I wanted to share them with you. Not that anyone did, but on the off chance that this appeared to be not a very important issue, nobody thinks this is a trivial issue. Regardless of the gaps in numbers, academics, policymakers, political leaders, private firms, all are coming to the conclusion that automation warrants significant attention everywhere. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund had their spring meeting in Washington, D.C., where I live. And the World Bank president, current president, Jim Yong-Kung, opened the meeting with one talk about this. And he said, we estimate that 2/3 of all jobs currently existing in the developing countries will be wiped out by automation. Now, that's extraordinary. Two, this may be known knowledge to you. I think it's very worthwhile noting if you do start to go look at these numbers. There are two major methods, and they come up with very different numbers. There is one way of looking at the future of jobs or jobs at risk, occupations at risk, in which the entirety of one occupation is looked at. Somebody says one job will disappear. A more nuanced effort has been made in a few major studies in which specific tasks are looked at. So an occupation, what I do all day, what you do all day, is composed of many activities, some of which are probably automatable, a few of which we probably deeply hope will be automated. That was a joke, okay. And some of which are that higher level activity, which it is still hard for a variety of reasons for computers to do. And they tend to come up with much lower numbers of total jobs lost, and to think a little bit differently about this. Sectors matter. Different sectors, different economic sectors will have different degrees of automation available to them at different times, because of course they do some very different types of work. They will ultimately make inroads everywhere. So this is not just a manufacturing issue, but will be very critical in direct service activities, food preparation and service, for example, and in professional back office services. So I think this point is clear, but, speaking from this side of the Mediterranean, if French or Spanish countries figure out that they can automate into a significant amount some of the work that they are currently outsourcing to other countries, then that is probably worth taking a look at. Regarding both of these points, just a few that do come up in the McKinsey study. McKinsey estimates that at present, and again, these numbers they're indications of something, but they're not concrete fact. But they do estimate that at present, 51% of Moroccan job activities have the potential for automation under currently existing technology. In Africa and the Middle East, they also say agriculture, fishing and hunting, manufacturing, administrative and support services are all sectors in which employees are potentially vulnerable. Another slice, a fourth slice of emerging wisdom is that there really is a lot of fluidity, nevertheless, to this emerging situation. Technology doesn't just remove jobs, its presence also creates jobs. So it is possible to see in this literature an emergent view that maybe what we are, in different ways in different places, but maybe what we are heading for is a period of severe displacement that, like other periods of severe displacement in history, actually resolves or doesn't last that way forever. Now, there are many ways of looking at this, but that is one, which is that we are about to face some sort of turbulent times, but that if we address those, we will ultimately kind of figure out how to live in a world with a great deal of automation. Canada, as I noted, is beginning to prepare for this by thinking cogently about how it will manage a sudden increase in people who are no longer working or getting the benefits that, in some places attached to employment, like health insurance and so forth. You are possibly familiar with a phrase that is kind of catchy in English, that robots that do particular jobs that are dangerous, dirty, dull, and delicate are a good idea because humans will be left with more creative and substantive opportunities to use their talents, which is an important thing to elevate. It is not the focus of my talk, but I would hone in on it. However, it's context dependent. China will undoubtedly face a different kind of situation than Canada. 5, different populations are vulnerable in different ways. There seems to be a pretty clear correlation between vulnerability or risk right now to currently existing technologies and education. Generally, the more highly educated you are, the less likely that the tasks that you do for your job will be automated quickly. And there are some kind of significant exceptions to this because lawyers and accountants who do some very regular and automatable work are considered to be at risk. The authors of the ASEAN study report that women's jobs are much more likely to be automatable because they tend to be lower paid and require less education in the first place. So country strategies will have to would like probably to take account of that as well. And finally, and very close to the end of this, I want to emphasize again that there are many factors that will affect how automation unfolds in a given country. So although I just focused on a bunch of numbers, my hope is that we all dig deeply into those numbers and think about what else we need, what else needs to be done, and what will and won't be done well. The White House study on artificial intelligence and automation last year probably came the closest to making a realistic forecast when its contributors wrote about the United States context that, quote, "Given available evidence, it is not possible to make specific predictions, so policymakers must be prepared for a range of potential outcomes. That lack of certainty is partly because, as they went on to note, there are other important factors shaping the environment. Other forms of technological change, globalization, reduction in the market competition and worker bargaining power, and of course, the effects of past public policy choices, which shape and enable or constrain what happens today." So let me just shift gears slightly for the last few minutes to just talk at a slightly more macroscopic level about the ways in which the prospect of, that's not where I wanted to go. I thought it would be nice to have a picture. large-scale automation undermine not simply country-level planning, but really potentially our whole idea about the way that trade and our economic system in a globalized world work. So the first of these lies in the relationship between manufacturing, productivity, and employment. This is pretty dangerous ground for a non-economist like me, because for almost every claim about how the economy works, there are theorists who have an entirely different idea. But let's just say, that mass production gave us our last big idea about how economies work. They went in the first part of the 20th century from working long hours in unpleasant conditions to having more power, social security, a decent wage, and benefits, which is why the loss of formal jobs is felt so deeply today. Throughout the 20th century, we know it was understood that higher industrial output produced more jobs and more national wealth. Globalization in the 1990s created the opportunity to create more national wealth through outsourcing, right, seeking lower labor costs. But the expectation remained that manufacturing was a stable source of employment for someone, whether that was in Detroit, in Bangladesh, or in China. But something strange happened after the 2008 recession, which was that manufacturing output arose up very high and employment rose hardly at all. So, as you know, American politician has been inclined to blame outsourcing for the situation, but that's not entirely the story. One story. The Shenzhen Rappu Technology Company in China builds computer keyboards and mice for use in computers. It has reduced its workforce by a third since 2010, from about 3,000 people to about 1,000 people buying robots to replace them. In the meantime, in those few years, we think about the globalized world. You can begin to see, when you put all this together, how powerfully disruptive this might be over time, and how relevant, I hope, it seems for all of us in all of our different regions. Although I just gave a story of roots to displacement, what I think the fact that these numbers are not set and we're still exploring what this means, and we understand that technology is actually only one part of how human productivity, whatever that becomes, unfolds, that also is an opportunity. So thank you very much again for my opportunity to speak here.